A war where not just weapons clashed, but minds, manipulation, and dark psychology collided. This war echoed not only with the arrows of Arjuna and Karna, but also with the smile of Shakuni, the stubbornness of Duryodhana, and the mysterious strategies of Krishna. The question is not whether in today's modern age you stand with dharma or adharma. The question is, are you lost in Arjuna's confusion or trapped in Shakuni's cunning game? Laughter echoing in the royal court, a dice rolled by an old uncle. Shakuni. Shakuni, the dice is in my hand, but the move is in my mind. A smile of victory on Duryodhana's face, and Dharmaraj Yudhishthira has already wagered his own brothers. Just one dice roll and the script of Mahabharat changes. Dark psychology insert, emotional blackmail. Shakuni never raised a sword, yet he was the greatest mastermind of the entire war. How? He first caught hold of Yudhishthira's moral dilemma. Using the name of Dharma, he pushed him into the addiction of gambling, made him wager his brothers, his wife, even himself. This is exactly what happens when someone traps you in guilt in the name of emotional values. In today's world, in offices, in relationships, or on social media, people deceive you just like Shakuni. The battlefield of Kurukshetra, conches have been blown, but Arjun's hand trembles. Hey Keshav, how can I shoot arrows at my own relatives? My hands refuse to rise. Krishna is silent, then smiles. Your attachment is your greatest enemy. Dark psychology insert, attachment and confusion. In today's world, there are millions like Arjun, trapped between right and wrong, who can't take decisions because they fear, what will people say? And then, someone like Krishna appears, who says, perform your duty, let go of the result. But pay attention, Krishna is not just a motivator, he is a master strategist. Krishna never breaks rules in war, but he knows how to bend them. Sometimes he lifts weapons in front of Bhishma. Sometimes he makes others lie to confuse Dronacharya. Ashwathama has been killed. The question arises, is this adharma or a dark strategy for the victory of dharma? Dark psychology insert, cleverness for justice. Krishna knows battles aren't won with plain truth. The world doesn't run in black and white. Here lies the grey zone, where even Krishna calls it not deception but strategy. In business, in politics, even in relationships, sometimes to win, you must use emotional intelligence. The question arises, are you Arjun or Shakuni? Are you Arjun, stuck in indecision, needing a Krishna? Or are you the one who's already made others' guilt, dharma, and relationships your pawn, a Shakuni? Or maybe, are you trying to become the one who sees everything, understands everything, and strikes at the right moment, Krishna? Mahabharat was not just a war. It was a mind war, and it still is. The only difference is, today's Kurukshetra lies in your relationships, your business, and your social media. And the one who wins is the one who understands his own dark psychology, and others too. This story is not just about a war. It was the greatest mind game ever played. Mahabharat was not history. It was the most complex laboratory of the human mind, where scriptures were sharper than swords, and every move hid a deep... Do you think Mahabharat was just a war, a simple battle of swords and arrows, or a fight between good and evil? If yes, then maybe you are still unaware of the most dangerous truth, the one hidden behind the pages of history. Mahabharat was not just a war, it was a mind lab, a psychological war zone, where every step was a strategic move, every word a weapon, and every decision a perception game. Imagine a war where swords were not used, but mind traps were, where to win. Emotional conditioning, cognitive dissonance, and behavioral exploitation were the real weapons. Sri Krishna was not just a god, but the Grand Master of mind control and strategic influence. Shakuni was not just a cunning uncle, but a living example of disinformation and manipulative psychology. Duryodhana was a classic case of narcissistic manipulation. Bhishma and Karna were pawns trapped in emotional guilt traps. And Draupadi? Her humiliation was not just a social crime, but the most terrifying example of trauma weaponization. The characters of Mahabharat were not ordinary people. They were archetypes, whose strategic psychology is still active around us. Politics, where power dynamics are created every day. Business, where decisions are influenced through psychological framing. relationships, where emotional blackmail has become a new norm, and social media, where algorithmic manipulation bends our thinking every single day. Those who recognize these mind games become winners. Those who don't are turned into villains in someone else's storyline. If you also want to decode manipulation, power play, and deep psychological triggers, then watch this video till the end. We will tell you about those hidden psychological weapons that were used not only in Mahabharat, but are still working all around you today. And yes, if you like this video, do like it, share it with your friends, and if you want more such mind-blowing psychological analysis, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments. Which Mahabharat character you find the most fascinating and why? So let's not waste any time. Let's dive into the dark psychology of Mahabharat. Krishna, the master of psychological warfare. Mahabharat was not just a war. It was the most complex and deadly psychological battle in history. There were no swords. Only thoughts collided. There were no arrows, but emotions pierced deep. And in this entire war, if there was one true master of mind games, it was Sri Krishna. He had no weapons, and still, he changed the entire outcome of the war. Why? Because he was not a god. He was a master of psychological warfare. His true power was the deep understanding of the human mind. He knew how people think, how they feel, and how their minds could be bent so they do exactly what you want them to do. Today's psychology calls it emotional manipulation, cognitive reframing, mind control, and deep perception engineering. Krishna used every one of these tools at every turn, in every move. When Arjuna stood in the battlefield, facing his own teachers, brothers, and relatives, he broke down. He dropped his weapons. He said, "I cannot fight this war." That's when Krishna rewired his mind, a powerful cognitive shift. He said, "This is not a battle of relationships. This is a sacrifice for the protection of dharma. The soul is immortal, the body perishable, and to grieve over what perishes is foolishness." He taught Arjuna selfless action. Do your duty without attachment to results. This was a pure example of mind reprogramming, and Arjuna stood up again, ready to fight. But the game didn't stop there. Krishna had entered the minds of every character. Karna, always humiliated as a charioteer's son, burned inside with the obsession to prove himself. Krishna struck right there. Just before the war, he revealed, "You are the son of Kunti." One sentence, and Karna's mind shattered. A moral conflict began within him. Is he fighting for the right side? Or Krishna struck deeper. He drowned Karna in guilt. He said, "Your mother has wept for years. Your real family is in pain." This was a classic case of guilt manipulation. Karna stayed with Duryodhana till the end, but mentally, he had already lost the battle. And then came the moment when Dronacharya had become invincible. Krishna laid another mind trap. He made Yudhishthira say, "Ashwatthama is dead," then softly added, "the elephant." This was a master-level Machiavellian strategy. Half-truth deception. Drona heard it, dropped his weapons, lost his will to fight, believed his son was dead. This is the same technique used today in media, politics, and business every single day. Now let's talk about Duryodhana, a classic narcissist, proud of his own strength. Krishna read this weakness, and during the mace fight with Bhim, he gave just one signal: strike on the thigh. This was subconscious mind control. No words, no instructions. Bhim did exactly that. Duryodhana fell. These mind games of Mahabharat are still alive today. In business, companies play with deception and perception. In politics, half-truths shake the minds of the public. In relationships, guilt-tripping, manipulation, cognitive reframing are everywhere. Krishna's greatest power was deep understanding of the human mind and the ability to bend that mind as he wished. He was not just a warrior, he was a mind architect. He proved that victory doesn't always come from strength. It also comes from mind games. Mahabharat was not a war, it was a psychological masterpiece where Krishna played the game, Shakuni, the mind game of destruction. If you understand the story of Mahabharat deeply, one thing becomes clear. The greatest mastermind of destruction was not a warrior. It was Shakuni. He never picked up a sword in battle, never spilled blood on the field, and yet his mind sowed a poison so powerful that the entire Kuru dynasty devoured itself. Shakuni, a dark manipulator, who used mind games to control every thought, every decision, like a puppet master. He was a master strategist. He filled Duryodhana's heart with such hatred for the Pandavas that Duryodhana couldn't even recognize his own downfall. This was the most dangerous form of narcissistic manipulation, where Shakuni nurtured Duryodhana's ego, made him believe that the Pandavas were stealing what was rightfully his, and as long as they lived, he could never become king. This was a classic case of confirmation bias, where a man sees only what he wants to see, while the truth remains invisible, even when it's right before his eyes. Shakuni's deadliest attack was the game of dice. Dice, a game where every loss of Yudhishthir was turned into the hope of a next win. This is a direct example of active psychology, where a person keeps thinking, "I'll win next time," and in that illusion, he loses himself, his brothers, even Draupadi. Shakuni didn't just play a game of dice, he played a game of emotions. His true weapon was gaslighting. He made Duryodhana believe that his fears were truth, his thoughts were wrong, and he must only do what Shakuni wanted. Time and again, Shakuni told Duryodhana, "If you don't destroy the Pandavas, then this kingdom, this power, will be taken from you." But the truth was, Shakuni himself was playing the real game. Shakuni's mind games are still alive in today's world. In corporate offices, where senior officials plant fear and insecurity into their rivals, mind so they end up making decisions against their own interest. In politics, where leaders are made to believe they're thinking freely, when in reality, they're not allowed to think at all. In Mahabharat, Shakuni didn't just trigger a war. He took the entire Kaurava empire under psychological control. Duryodhana trusted him so blindly, he failed to see that this very trust was the reason for his doom. This was the most dangerous form of toxic leadership, where the leader appears to be your well-wisher, but in truth only seeks his own gain. Shakuni's greatest weapon was his web of words. His speech was sweet like poison, slowly numbing the listener, making them incapable of thinking for themselves. He never lifted a weapon, but pushed the world into a war that destroyed generations. If Shakuni is called the most dangerous player of Mahabharat, it would not be wrong. For his personal revenge, he threw all of civilization into fire. Because he knew, defeating the enemy may be hard, but if you twist their thinking, they'll destroy themselves. And that is exactly what he did to Duryodhana. That's why Shakuni was the darkest manipulator of Mahabharat, who didn't fight a war. He created a psychological trap, victim of honor-cistic manipulation. In the story of Mahabharat, if any character has been the most misunderstood, it is Duryodhana. The world has always called him an arrogant, unrighteous, and proud prince. But the truth is, Duryodhana was not just a villain. He was a victim of dark psychological manipulation. A narcissist, shaped by his upbringing and environment to walk straight into the script of his own destruction. Since childhood, he was made to believe that he alone was the true heir of the Kuru kingdom. And the Pandavas, they had come only to steal what was his. This wasn't just ordinary thinking. It was deep programming of victim mentality. He was constantly made to feel that injustice was being done to him. Every comparison shattered him inside. Bhim's strength, Arjun's skill, Yudhishthir's righteousness. Every time the Pandavas were portrayed as superior. And all of it slowly gave birth to an inferiority complex inside Duryodhana. But he never admitted it. He transformed it into pride, into rage, into the fire of revenge. Shakuni poured fuel into this burning fire. He fed Duryodhana's ego until he began to see himself as supreme. This was classic gaslighting, where a person's thinking is twisted so much that he can no longer recognize the truth. Shakuni made Duryodhana believe that the Pandavas were the greatest threat to his existence, his power, his honor. When he saw the prosperity of Indraprastha, when he saw Yudhishthir crowned as emperor, the jealousy that rose within him was not ordinary envy. It was narcissistic injury. A psychological wound where, instead of breaking inside, a person ignites with rage, violence, and vengeance. At the time of the Rashtriya Yagya, his ego was brutally wounded. He felt, if the Pandavas weren't stopped, his pride, his power, everything would be lost. And then Shakuni trapped him in a psychological game, the game of dice, where Duryodhana was shown a guaranteed win. But in reality, it was a manipulative trap. The defeat of the Pandavas in that game, the insult of Draupadi, did not just destroy the Pandavas, it dragged Duryodhana himself into the path of ruin. This was Duryodhana's greatest tragedy. He was never ready to accept he was wrong. This was classic narcissism, where a person refuses to take responsibility for their actions and instead blames others every time. When Krishna came with the message of peace, Duryodhana saw even that as an attack on his ego. He began to believe that even giving the Pandavas 5 villages would mean his defeat. This was ego-driven self-destruction, where a man, just to protect his pride, sacrifices logic, the future, and his entire dynasty. Krishna tried to explain to him, but Duryodhana thought of himself as greater than God. This was the illusion of superiority, where a person blindly believes he is better than everyone else, even when the truth screams otherwise. In the war of Mahabharat, when his commanders were killed, when his brothers fell in the battlefield, even then he could not accept defeat. This was narcissistic denial, where instead of accepting reality, a person chooses to live in the lie he created for himself. And when Bhim broke his thigh, when he lay on the ground, defeated, even then, he tried to convince himself he was still the victor, because by then, his ego was in complete control of his mind. Duryodhana's greatest loss was not in the war. He had already lost in the battle within his own mind. Duryodhana's story gives us a deep lesson. When a person, instead of accepting the truth, starts living in delusion, ego, and manipulation, he becomes the very reason for his own destruction. Even today, such people are everywhere. In politics, business, relationships, who, because of their own narcissism, ignore the truth, and in the end, ruin themselves. Because the real defeat happens when the mind stops accepting. If you're liking this story, then make sure to like and subscribe, because the next part will be even more shocking. The guilt manipulation, Bhishma and Karna. In the history of Mahabharat, if we search for the most tragic psychological victims, 2 names appear first, Bhishma and Karna. They were not just warriors, they were prisoners of a mental war, victims of an invisible but extremely dangerous strategy, guilt manipulation. Guilt manipulation, a mental trap where a person is bound so tightly by their own promises, duties, and emotions that they begin making decisions against themselves. Bhishma, the most powerful warrior of Hastinapur. But his greatest enemy was not an outside force. It was his own vow. When he pledged lifelong celibacy and the protection of Hastinapur for the sake of his father Shantanu, from that very moment, his vow became a mind trap. That very vow turned into a psychological weapon for the Kauravas. Many times, Bhishma realized that Duryodhana was walking the path of adharma. His conscience would scream inside, but every time his vow would stop him like a mental programming. Even during Draupadi's disrobing, Bhishma knew this was injustice. Still, he remained silent. Why? Because he was trapped in a moral guilt trap. A trap where even after knowing what's right and what's wrong, a person sides with the wrong only because he fears violating his duty. Now, let's talk about Karna. His pain takes this guilt manipulation to another level. Since childhood, Karna was made to believe, you are a Sutaputra, you have no social worth. And Duryodhana, he saw this inferiority complex and turned it into an opportunity. Duryodhana gave Karna respect, a place, called him brother. But hidden behind that friendship was loyalty guilt manipulation. Karna was made to believe that his greatest responsibility was towards Duryodhana, whether on the path of dharma or adharma. When Krishna revealed the truth to Karna, that he was the brother of the Pandavas, Karna had a chance to switch sides. But he didn't. Why? Because he had mentally conditioned himself that if he left Duryodhana's side, he would be called a traitor. This was the most dangerous form of emotional blackmailing. In the war of Mahabharat, when Karna learned the truth that he was Kunti's son, he stood at a crossroads. One path, to support dharma. The other, to stay loyal to the friend who gave him a place in society. And Karna chose adharma. Why? Because he was afraid of losing that one man's respect which he had earned all his life. Bhishma and Karna, both were great warriors, but both became victims of psychological manipulation. Bhishma because of vow guilt, Karna because of loyalty guilt. This is Mahabharat's deepest psychological lesson. If a person becomes so trapped that he can no longer decide between right and wrong, his downfall is certain, even today. This manipulation exists everywhere. Sometimes someone fears leaving a toxic job just because they learned a lot there. Sometimes someone suffocates in a relationship because the other person once did them a favor. The story of Bhishma and Karna teaches us, if guilt takes over our decision-making, then we too will find ourselves standing on the wrong side. And when that happens, no Krishna will come to save us. Psychological trauma, Draupadi's public humiliation, a mental weapon. That scene from Mahabharat, when Draupadi was dragged into the full court and an attempt was made to disrobe her. This was not just an incident. It showed how psychological trauma can be used as a dark weapon. This wasn't just physical humiliation. It was a deep mental breakdown strategy, executed with full planning. It was a calculated attack, meant to break Draupadi emotionally and mentally. History is witness, and even today, the same thing happens. The most effective way to completely destroy someone is public humiliation, a wound that doesn't hit the body, but pierces the soul. When Yudhishthir had lost everything in the game, that's when Shakuni started his psychological scheming, and said Draupadi too can be staked now. This wasn't gambling, this was a mental submission plan. Duryodhana knew the Pandavas' biggest strength was their unity and inner willpower, and the cruelest way to break it was to humiliate their wife in front of the entire court. It was a humiliation-based control strategy, where a person is broken so badly that even their soul surrenders. When Draupadi was dragged into the assembly, this was not just an atrocity on a woman, this was psychological warfare. Duryodhana and Dushasana made sure her dignity was dragged to the ground. When Dushasana tried to pull her clothes, it was not just a physical act. It was a deep psychological assault. Her self-respect, her identity, her entire existence, everything was being erased. The most dangerous part of such attacks is forced public shaming. When someone is insulted in private, they might recover, but when they are broken in front of hundreds, their mind is scarred forever. This is what happened to Draupadi. That insult became the biggest psychological scar of her life. But she didn't let that trauma become her weakness. She transformed it into post-traumatic growth. She took an oath that until the Kauravas are punished for their deeds, she will not rest. She turned her mental wound into her greatest strength. Even today, the same thing is happening. On social media, people are deliberately humiliated. This is a digital psychological trap that pushes people toward depression. But some people, like Draupadi, turn that trauma into a power transition point. Draupadi showed the world that if humiliation is endured and redirected in the right direction, it can become a mental revenge mechanism. This Mahabharat incident is not just the story of a woman's insult. It shows how trauma is used as a weapon in mental warfare, but it also teaches that if a person discovers their inner strength, no psychological wound can break them. Instead, it can make them invincible. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. Kurukshetra War, the ultimate dark psychology experiment. The War of Mahabharat was not just a battlefield. It was a grand psychological experiment, where at every step, mind games, strategic control, and deep behavioral mapping were used. This was that turning point in history, where dark psychology was fully unleashed on human consciousness, and the result, an entire civilization collapsed. Kurukshetra was not just the sound of weapons. It was an arena of mental torment, where every warrior was trapped in some invisible psychological snare. Sri Krishna didn't fight this war like a battlefield. He played it like a massive chessboard. He didn't just teach the Pandavas how to wield a sword. He took them through disemotional conditioning. He pulled them out of guilt, fear, and emotional weakness and made them focus on just one point: victory. On the other side were the Kauravas, warriors like Duryodhana, Shakuni, and Karna, who had already become prisoners of their own emotions. Ego-driven decision-making became their greatest enemy. In this war, along with the outer battles, every warrior was fighting an inner war too. When Sri Krishna spoke the Gita to Arjuna, it was actually an emotional disruption therapy. Arjuna was overwhelmed by guilt and attachment. He didn't want to raise weapons against his own brothers and elders. But Krishna, through psychological reframing, explained, this war is not personal. It is between dharma and adharma. And that was a master-level mind reorientation. The Kauravas also used psychological weapons. Karna crafted a full strategy to mentally break Arjuna. Duryodhana tried to instill fear in the Pandavas by flaunting his massive army. It was a classic fear exposure technique. But Krishna answered it with war psychology. He showed true strength doesn't lie in numbers, but in mental state. When Yudhishthir used deceit in war, it went against his core nature. Deceiving about Ashwatthama was a moral dilemma for him. But Krishna, through cognitive reduction, altered Yudhishthir's mental state. He was made to understand this lie is to protect dharma, and that was a mind alignment strategy. To disable a great warrior like Bhishma, Krishna used Shakuni. This was behavioral conditioning, where a person's morality itself was turned into a weapon against him. What happened with Karna was the biggest example of trust exploitation. Duryodhana made him believe till the end that he was his greatest friend. But by the time Karna discovered his true identity, it was already too late. And in the end, when Duryodhana stood alone, having lost everything, his mental collapse had begun. It was a narcissistic collapse, where a person who always wanted to control others was now shattered himself. The war of Kurukshetra was not just a clash of weapons. It was history's greatest dark psychology experiment, where strategies like fear triggering, guilt manipulation, emotional redirection, mind control, trust destruction, and psychological breakdown were used openly. This war teaches us that mental strength is the greatest strength, and the one who can read minds, break minds, or bend minds is the true victor. In today's world, there are millions like Arjuna who are stuck between right and wrong, who, trapped in the fear of what will people say, are unable to make decisions. And then someone like Krishna appears who says, do your duty, let go of the result. But listen carefully, Sri Krishna is not just a motivator, he is a master strategist too. Mahabharat is not just a war, it was a mind war, and it still is. The only difference is, today's Kurukshetra lies within your relationships, business, and social media, and the one who wins is the one who understands their own dark psychology, and others too. That's why, friends, the war of Mahabharat is not just a historical event. It is an inner battle, a dark psychological war, one that never ends, until a person becomes free from the cycle of life and death. You might be wondering, where does this war happen? In the 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna said, this body itself is the battlefield. This is Kurukshetra, where every human must fight their most dangerous war. But the question is, war against whom? The answer is, against two armies within yourself. The first is the army of the Pandavas, the power of virtue, and the second is the army of the Kauravas, the programming of sin. These two armies are hidden in our mind, our consciousness, and our desires. And every day, this psychological struggle continues. Now let's talk about the warrior who lives within us. Abhimanyu, the Abhay man, the fearless mind, a mindset that is unafraid of any fear trigger, one that crosses even the imagination of death inside the brain. In the Mahabharat, Abhimanyu broke through 6 gates of the Chakravyu, but he was stopped at the 7th gate. Why? Not because of fear, but because he was killed through deceit. Just like our self-confidence often gets trapped by society, by systems, by relationships. Now we come to Arjuna. Arjuna means anurag, an emotional attachment formed with the divine mind. But as long as Arjuna remained trapped in attachment, fear, and confusion, he could not make a decision. Sri Krishna decoded his mind. He reframed it, and that same Arjuna transformed into an anurag who destroyed his own illusions. And when that anurag becomes fearless, that Arjuna gives birth to Abhimanyu. But the game doesn't end here. There's another warrior sitting within us, Bhishma, the illusion. This is the most dangerous mental virus in the universe. The illusion that I am the most powerful, that my beliefs are final. This very illusion leads a person to self-destruction. In the Mahabharat, Arjuna laid this illusion down with the arrows of awareness, meaning when awareness, that is, mindfulness, awakens, illusion loses. But then enters Dron, the duality. He is the master of mind control. He divides the human, makes him feel separate from God, and traps him in his own chakravyu. This very duality traps the fearless mind, Abhimanyu, and finishes him there. It is the game of perception distortion. Then comes Ashwatthama, attachment, which never dies. It is immortal. It stays in every human's life till the end. Attachment to some object, feeling, or person. It cannot be killed, but it can be disabled. And in this entire war, the most dangerous is Dhritarashtra, ignorance. He is the symbol of mind blindness. From this arises delusion. And from delusion is born Duryodhana, the self-destructive king within us, the one who wants to control everything, and in the end remains all alone. This war is not external, it is an internal psychological experiment, in which every day, every moment, our consciousness is silently fighting a Mahabharat. But when a human walks the path of righteousness and performs noble actions, the laws of the universe begin to change. God, who was silent until now, suddenly stands beside him. The one who walks on the path of dharma becomes Arjuna, or wrestles with his inner self like Anurag, and then Sri Krishna himself appears within his soul to guide him. In his heart, which was silent for years, now burns the fire of a war. This fire is not against an army outside, but against the sinful army sitting within. And God inspires him, fight, win, and ultimately be free. Friends, this earth holds countless pleasures, but when the soul gets tired of them, when it begins to see the mortality behind it all, then it calls out. And Sri Krishna must hear that call, because that call is no longer silence, it becomes the scream of the soul. God says, "O Arjuna, the one who has truly recognized me is the real wise one. Such a devotee desires nothing but God. He seeks only the selfless love of the Supreme Soul." This is what the Gita wants to teach us. That is why the Gita reached us all. Otherwise, it would have remained only with Arjuna. Remember, the Gita is not just a holy scripture. It is a battle of consciousness. It stands above every religion. It is relevant at all times, in every situation, for every human being. The message of Sri Krishna does not only show us the path of life, it carries our soul to the ultimate truth of our existence, union with God. But sadly, we see the Mahabharat as just a story, when in truth, this war must be fought by everyone. We must end our attachments. We must listen to that voice within, the one we've been suppressing for years. When a person breaks down, when he feels defeated, when he wanders in the darkness of sorrow and despair, then suddenly a verse from the Srimad Bhagavad Gita becomes the comfort of his night. And you don't even realize when those very words calm you and put you to sleep. Friends, I hope this essence of the Gita touched your soul. If this video touched your heart, then do like and subscribe from the heart. Radhe Radhe, Sri Krishna.